Since the end of the Korean War in 1953, the country has been one of the poorest in the world. The average income of a Korean by 1960 was only $158 per year, less than, for example, in Liberia and Guatemala. The 1988 Olympics was the first significant public event in modern Korean history. Koreans understood that now they were in full view and they needed to show themselves in the best possible light. At that time, the image of Korea in the world was negative. The country was associated with student demonstrations, which were dispersed with tear gas. Among the countries that gained independence after the Second World War, South Korea is the only one that has achieved success in both areas, economic development and democratization. South Korea can compete with the leaders of the European Union in these areas. Now let's take a closer look at what South Korea has achieved over the past 50 years and what is the secret of its success. About 50 years ago, after the Korean War, 1950 to 1953, South Korea was one of the poorest countries in the world with a gross domestic product of $67 per capita. South Korea's infrastructure was destroyed by the Korean War, and millions of people lived in extreme poverty, and the country faced huge numbers of unemployed people who struggled to meet even basic needs. North Korea was in a better position than South Korea. Until about the mid-70s of the last century. At one point, South Korea even received humanitarian aid from Thailand and the Philippines. However, South Korea has achieved amazing economic development over the past 50 years. South Korea today is one of the most prosperous countries. Gross domestic product per capita has grown more than 300 times over the past 60 years and is on par with the EU average in terms of purchasing power parity. It should be noted that South Korea set two incredible world records in 2010. First, South Korea became a major donor of humanitarian aid for the first time in history, once a country that received humanitarian aid. Second, in 2012 South Korea joined the 20 to 50 Club, which includes countries whose gross domestic product exceeds $20,000 and whose population exceeds 50 million. South Korea became the seventh member of the World Club after the USA, Japan, Germany, France, Italy and England, and became the only country on this list to ever receive humanitarian aid. The term miracle on the Hongong River is used to refer to the exponential growth of South Korean merchandise exports and South Korea's post-war economic development. It includes rapid industrialization, high technological achievements, successful development of the education system, a significant increase in the standard of living. Also global urbanization with its striking skyscrapers, modernization of all spheres of life, as well as the brilliant 1988 Summer Olympics, the organization of the FIFA World Cup in 2002 and the 2018 Winter Olympics. This growth was accompanied by democratization and globalization, which raised the country from the ashes of the Korean War, turning it into a rich and prosperous country with a developed world economy and major international conglomerates, Samsung, LG, Hyundai. In particular, this phrase refers to the economic growth of Seoul, through which the Han River flows, and is used to describe the entire country. Also, the word miracle is usually applied to the amazing economic growth that took place from 1961 to 1996. The phrase miracle on the Hongong itself is a copy of the phrase miracle on the Rhine, which describes the economic transformation of West Germany after the Second World War. When General Park Chung-hee was elected president in 1963, South Korea had a gross domestic product of less than $100 a year. In the 1960s, South Korea depended on foreign aid, particularly American and Japanese aid. The New Society movement focused on agricultural development in South Korea. The strong leadership, sometimes criticized as oppressive and oppressive, has served as a catalyst for South Korean economic growth. In less than 4 decades, Seoul developed into an international business and commerce city in Northeast Asia. A highly developed economic center that creates all conditions for the development of technological and communication infrastructure. Its rapid economic growth is considered a symbol of the national pride and self-reliance of the Korean people. South Korea has grown not only economically, but also in terms of the development of political aspects. Democracy in South Korea was not earned in just one day. The country once experienced a repressive regime, but the strong will and determination of the people to make life in the country better, allowed South Korea to achieve high standards of democracy. South Korean democracy is commendable, as it was achieved in very unfavorable conditions, the threat from North Korea since the days of the Korean War. Why is Korea's development so remarkable? Because Korea has achieved success not only in economy but also in democracy from practically zero to the level of an average European country in just 50 years, which is unprecedented in world history. For these reasons, South Korea's development model is becoming the most popular model. At the same time, South Korea actively acts as an intermediary between developed and developing countries. Now you might ask a question: how did South Korea achieve such results in economic and democratic development, while some other developing countries have not yet been able to achieve this? Especially considering that South Korea was completely destroyed after the Korean War. Indeed, unlike other developing countries, South Korea had unfavorable conditions for development, such as a small area bounded by a peninsula and possessing scarce natural resources, as well as constant threats from North Korea. How did South Korea overcome all these difficulties and become the only country to achieve such development? What is the secret of her overwhelming success? In many ways, the Korean miracle was aided by educational success. Many Koreans are future-oriented. They are willing to invest in the education of their children, believing that good teaching is the key to personal success and national development. The zeal for the development of education in South Korea allows her to provide the best education for her children. South Korea's tertiary enrollment rate was 99%. A high-quality, highly motivated workforce plays a critical role in providing the Korean nation with a high-tech industry. The high level of education of Korean citizens also contributes to the democratization of South Korea. In addition, many Koreans who studied in America and Europe after returning home are spreading Western values of freedom and democracy in South Korea. We now understand that South Korea's successful development is unique and unprecedented. Let's think about how you can benefit from this story. First, the fate of a country largely depends on the position of its people, regardless of unfavorable external conditions, such as small territory, scarce natural resources, and constant threats from North Korea. South Korea was able to overcome all difficulties thanks to the strong will, hard work, and determination of its people and to achieve its goals. Second, democracy and a market economy are always preferable to despotism and a controlled and regulated economy. South and North Korea have been one country for 1,500 years, people are the same, the only difference is in the management system. North Korea is now considered one of the most backward countries, while South Korea is one of the most developed. Comparing the two countries is a clear example that a combination of democracy and a market economy is the best option. Third, the contribution of donor countries to the world community. The countries that need help are the interests of the countries contributing troops in the long term with a focus on long-term cooperation. For example, a small country like the Netherlands has made a huge contribution to the survival and successful development of South Korea. Sent 5,322 Dutch troops and 6 warships to defend South Korea from North Korean aggression during the Korean War in 1950 and 1959. With this, the Netherlands provided South Korea with economic and military assistance for a fairly long time. With the support of the international community, including the Netherlands, South Korea has risen to its feet and achieved economic and political prosperity. Now look at the benefits the Netherlands has received from the dispatch of troops and the use of its taxpayers' money to help South Korea. Trade relations between the Netherlands and South Korea's investment in the Netherlands have created tens of thousands of jobs in the Netherlands. In addition, as an international democracy, the trading economic system that supports the Netherlands has become stronger by the existence of South Korea and the sharing of its interests and values with it. Nationalization of banks and state monopoly of financial services. State banks took loans abroad and then they themselves lent to local companies at reduced rates. In this way, the production defined by the government was stimulated. The government has written off all loan debts. At that time, 58% of the peasants had them. It also freed small creditors, primarily farmers, from paying interest on loans. At the same time, the authorities encouraged the population to open deposits and save for old age. Pensions as such, except for civil servants and the military in the Republic of Korea, no one received until 2005, and even now it is only funded. State banks offered depositors a high interest rate on deposits, thus stimulating the flow of money from the population. These dated rates provided state banks with less money than lending abroad. President Park Chung-hee His 18-year reign was marked by the implementation of an extensive industrial development program that led to the current prosperity. At the same time, he went down in history as a supporter of a strong government, who later introduced martial law in the country and changed the constitution to get more powers. President Park used his power to force wealthy Koreans, whom he believed to be corrupt, to invest in the country's industries, including shipyards. The government of President Park left behind the public sector all the strategic sectors of the economy: railways, ports and airports, power plants, power grids, water supply, gas distribution companies, oil pipelines. Almost all of this was viewed by the Korean government not as a commercial facility and a generator of profit, but as an infrastructure that would allow developing industry in the social sphere. Creation of large industrial corporations. Kabali, their patronage of protection from foreign competitors and trade unions. Following the Japanese example, several dozen large private corporations Kabali were created, which received assignments to develop a specific sector. In each sector, regulated competition was created between 2-3 participants. Within a few decades, cables have grown into world-famous brands: LG, Hyundai, Samsung, Daewoo. Before the reform began, South Korean society did not respect the oligarchs, considering all of them to be swindlers, thieves and embezzlers of public funds. This was not far from the truth. The only type of big business until 1962 was considered to cut the budget and American loans. President Park managed to turn the tide. What does South Korea produce? High-tech companies have made South Korea's economy booming and prosperous. For example, Samsung, one of the largest electronics companies in the world. It manufactures high-tech smartphones, tablets, computers, cameras and televisions. And these are just some of the devices it produces. It is she who is the #1 company in the global smartphone market, selling more than 1 million phones a day. Offices are located in more than 50 countries, employing more than 90,000 workers. The Hyundai company is engaged in the manufacture of cars and trucks. She is also responsible for the production of Kia vehicles. This company sells over 3.5 million cars every year. The company employs about 60,000 people. This Korean company is among the top 5 car manufacturers worldwide. LG Corporation is one of the largest conglomerates in South Korea, covering the electronics, chemical and telecommunications services industries, manufacturing and exporting goods to more than 80 countries. First of all, air conditioners, high-tech TVs made using smart TV technology with a LED screen, telephones and refrigerators. South Korea boasts the world's leading ship production, along with the largest ports in Busan. Heavy industry. Hyundai is the world's largest shipbuilding industry leader. Taxation, the reduction in tax rates, which the government went to, did not lead to a total budget deficit. Social spending in the country was relatively low due to the strong cult of the family. But Korea managed to attract new investors who received favorable conditions for investment. South Korea, despite the lag, has achieved unprecedented high achievements in economic development and democratization. As a result, South Korea, which was previously a backward country, is today one of the most popular role models among developing nations around the world. South Korea managed to create everything, almost out of nothing, making the main bet on its almost only resource: people. The government and the public have recognized the importance of a well-educated workforce and have devoted all their resources to the implementation of this program. Its success led to the emergence of a whole army of highly qualified engineers and workers in the country, who managed to become the basis of the production system, on which, in turn, the economy began to flourish. In 30 years, Korea has traveled a path that Western developed countries have traveled for a century. That's all. Share the video with your friends. Like and subscribe to the Mood Flow channel. See you soon.